Welcome to our channel Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. For more than 30 years, everyone believed Daniel Carter was an ordinary man. A quiet neighbor, a loyal worker, a harmless face in the crowd. But behind that calm smile was a secret he carried alone. A secret he thought would stay buried forever. Tonight, you'll discover the truth he spent decades hiding. A tilted picture frame, a stranger watching from a car, and the sudden return of a man he hoped was long dead. Daniel's peaceful life is about to shatter because the past he escaped is hunting him again. This is the story of a man who lived a double life for decades until the shadows finally caught up. For more than 30 years, Daniel Carter lived a life that most people would call ordinary. He woke up at the same time every morning, drove the same silver car to the same office building, and returned home before sunset to the same quiet house at the end of Willow Lane. Neighbors waved at him, and he waved back with a polite smile that never revealed too much. To them, Daniel was the kind of man who blended into the background. Solid, predictable, safe. And Daniel worked very hard to keep it that way because the truth was that Daniel Carter had two lives. One was the peaceful, quiet existence everyone saw. The other was a life carefully hidden in the shadows, protected by secrets that had followed him since his youth. Every day he woke up, he slipped into the role of the gentle, patient office worker. But beneath that calm mask, he carried memories and responsibilities that no one in Willow Lane would ever imagine. His second life began long before he moved to the neighborhood. Decades earlier, Daniel had been part of a covert investigation team. He had been trained to blend in anywhere, to watch without being noticed, and to gather information that others could not. It was not a violent job, but it was a dangerous one. He had seen things that stayed with him, and he had made choices that shaped the man he would become. When the organization dissolved, most agents returned to their old worlds. But Daniel did not have an old world to return to. His work had swallowed his past completely. And so he built a new one from scratch. He wanted a quiet life, but the habits of his old work stayed with him. Even after all these years, he noticed every detail around him. He never sat with his back to a door. He kept duplicate keys hidden in 3 different locations. He memorized the routines of his neighbors without meaning to. And although he tried to ignore it, he often felt the old tension in his chest, the sense that someone, somewhere might still be watching him. One cold Monday morning, as he walked to his car, he noticed something unusual. A black sedan he had never seen before was parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and the driver sat completely still, not looking at anything in particular. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a normal visitor or a delivery driver. But Daniel felt a spark of awareness he had not felt in years. Something inside him tightened. He checked his watch, pretended to adjust his jacket, and continued walking. He did not look back, but he listened carefully for any sound behind him. There was none at work. Daniel tried to focus on his tasks, but his mind kept returning to the car. He reminded himself that the world had moved on. No one from his past should be looking for him. His old life was gone. The organization was gone. Perhaps he was imagining danger where there was none. But old instincts are not easy to silence. During lunch, he sat in the break room alone. A new employee entered and smiled at him. She was young, friendly, and curious, someone who liked to ask questions. Daniel was polite, but he kept his answers short. He had spent years avoiding attention, and he did not plan on changing that. People who asked too many questions made him uneasy, even when they were harmless. When he returned home later that day, the black sedan was gone. He let out a slow breath, but he did not relax fully. The empty space where the car had been felt like a message, though he could not explain why. He double-checked the locks on his doors that night and sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the quiet house around him. The old Daniel, the watcher, the observer, was awake again. The following week passed normally. No strange cars. No unusual noises. No unexpected visitors. Daniel almost convinced himself that nothing was wrong. But one evening, as he walked to the kitchen to prepare dinner, he froze. The small framed picture on his hallway wall was tilted slightly. He always kept his home perfectly arranged. He would never leave something out of place. A tilt that small could be explained by many things: a vibration, a careless brush, even a draft. But Daniel knew it was none of those. Someone had entered his home. He checked every room carefully. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Everything was quiet. But someone had been there long enough to touch the frame. Someone had wanted him to know. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He sat by the window, watching the street, waiting for movement in the shadows. The memories he had tried so hard to bury came rushing back. He had made enemies years ago, people who wanted information he refused to give. Could they have found him after all this time? Or was someone new looking for him? The next morning, Daniel made a decision he had avoided for decades. He went to the old wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom. Inside it were items from his past documents, tools, and a simple black notebook that held the names of people he once worked with. He had not opened it in more than 20 years. As he flipped through the pages, he felt the weight of his past settle on his shoulders again. One name had a faint mark next to it, a mark he had made long ago to remind himself of a potential threat, someone who had disappeared before their last mission, someone unpredictable, someone dangerous. Daniel closed the notebook slowly. If that person had found him, then the peaceful life he had carefully built was no longer safe. And the people around him, including the neighbors who waved every morning, had no idea what storm might be approaching. Daniel had lived a double life for decades. He had hoped the second one, the quiet, harmless one, would be the life he lived until the end. But now, the shadows of the first life were reaching for him again. And he knew he could not ignore them. For the first time in many years, Daniel Carter prepared himself for the possibility that his two lives were about to collide. Daniel woke before sunrise the next morning. He had barely slept, but his mind was sharper than it had been in years. The quiet house felt different now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He moved through each room carefully, checking the locks again, checking the floors for new marks, checking the windows for any sign that someone had returned. Nothing else was disturbed. Only the picture frame had been touched. Only that one thing had been moved. As if someone wanted to remind him that they were close, he sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee he did not drink. Instead, he watched the steam rise from the cup while he thought about the marked name in the notebook. The man's name was Victor Hale. Victor had been part of the same team years ago, but even back then, he was different. He was ambitious, secretive, and angry at the organization for reasons he never shared. Daniel had never trusted him. And when Victor disappeared during their final assignment, many believed he had gone rogue. Daniel never saw him again, but he remembered the threat Victor whispered before he left. One day, I will finish what I started. Daniel hoped Victor had forgotten those words. But the tilted picture frame made him believe otherwise. The sun slowly rose, painting the sky pale orange. Daniel knew he could not sit still. If someone truly was searching for him, then he could not allow the people around him to be harmed. He grabbed his jacket, stepped outside, and walked down Willow Lane like he did every morning. But today, he was not walking to blend in. He was walking to observe. He watched each house, each car, each shadow. The neighborhood was waking up. People watered their plants. Kids waited for the school bus. Someone jogged past him with headphones on. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Danger hid best inside normal places. Daniel reached the end of the street and paused. A delivery truck was stopped near the corner, engine running. The driver was sorting boxes in the back. Daniel studied him. A normal driver would work quickly, but this man kept glancing toward the neighborhood. When Daniel turned to leave, the driver's eyes followed him for a moment too long. Daniel continued walking without slowing down, but he changed his route. He cut through a small park and circled back toward his house from the opposite direction. When he reached the street again, the delivery truck was gone. Back inside his home, Daniel opened the wooden box again. He took out a small device, a simple tracker he had used in the past. He had rebuilt it with spare parts over the years, telling himself it was only a habit, something to keep his hands busy. Now he was grateful he still had it. He placed the tracker in his pocket and drove to the grocery store. He did not need food. He needed to see if anyone was following him. He parked the car, walked inside, and pretended to shop. He moved through the aisles slowly, pushing the cart without putting anything in it. Every few minutes, he checked who was behind him, who entered the aisle after he did, who watched him a little too closely. Most people were normal shoppers. But then Daniel noticed a man near the frozen section. He wore a dark jacket and stood extremely still, pretending to look at the shelves. But his eyes flicked toward Daniel several times. Daniel kept moving. He picked up a box of cereal and studied the ingredients. His attention was completely on the man behind him. When Daniel pushed the cart toward the back exit, the man followed. Daniel walked faster. He reached the exit door and pushed it open. A cold breeze hit his face. He stepped outside into the alley behind the store. The man stepped out a few seconds later. Daniel turned sharply, crossed the alley, and squeezed between two parked cars. He crouched down, letting the cars block the man's line of sight. The man reached the alley entrance and paused. He looked left, then right. He did not look confused. He looked annoyed. As if he had expected Daniel to keep walking in a straight line, the man pulled out his phone. Daniel watched carefully from his hiding spot. The man spoke in a low voice, but Daniel could see his lips move. A short message. A report. Then the man walked away. Daniel waited until he was gone before standing. He stepped quietly to the man's car, a black sedan with a slightly damaged rear light. He knelt next to it and slid the tiny tracker under the bumper, attaching it with a small magnet. Then he walked back to the store, picked up his cart, and left as if nothing had happened. Back home. Daniel activated the small receiver connected to the tracker. A blinking dot appeared on the screen. The man's car was moving across town, heading toward an unfamiliar part of the city. Daniel watched the dot until it stopped beside an old, abandoned warehouse near the industrial district. His heart beat harder. Warehouses were perfect places for secret meetings. And if Victor Hale was involved, he would choose a place far from attention. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the blinking dot. He knew what he had to do, but he did not want to do it. The quiet life he had built meant something to him. But the tilt of the picture frame kept returning to his mind. Someone had been inside his home. Someone wanted him afraid. He could not ignore this. He needed answers. He changed into darker clothes and packed a small bag with the few tools he still had from his old life. He drove across town, staying several cars behind the normal flow of traffic. When he reached the street near the warehouse, he parked far away and continued on foot. The warehouse stood silent, its windows broken, its walls cracked with age. But there were fresh tire tracks on the ground. Daniel moved slowly, keeping close to the shadows. He reached a sidewall and listened. He heard voices inside. 2 men, maybe 3. One voice was calm and deep. The other voice was softer, but tense. Daniel did not recognize them. He moved along the wall until he found a small gap in one of the broken window frames. He looked inside. He froze. A man stood with his back to him. The man had broad shoulders, dark clothing, and a familiar posture. Slowly, he turned his head, revealing a face Daniel had not seen in more than 20 years. It was Victor. When Daniel stepped away from the window as quietly as he could, his heart pounded. Victor was alive. Victor was here. And Victor was searching for him. Daniel knew his peaceful life was not only an indent, it was about to explode. Daniel moved back into the shadows, keeping his breath slow and controlled. He had imagined many things over the years, but seeing Victor again felt unreal. It was as if a ghost from his old life had stepped out of the darkness and into the present. He leaned against the cold wall of the warehouse, trying to steady his thoughts. If Victor was here, then everything Daniel had feared was true. Someone had found him. Someone wanted something from his past, something dangerous enough to disturb decades of silence. He waited until the voices inside grew louder, then carefully circled around to the rear of the building. There was a rusted metal staircase that led to a small door, half torn from its hinges. Daniel pushed it open slowly, creating only the softest creak. The room he entered was empty, except for broken crates and dust that covered the floor. He stepped across it quietly and reached the top of a short hallway. From there, he could hear Victor more clearly. Victor's voice was deeper than Daniel remembered, but still sharp. He was speaking to the two men Daniel had seen earlier. Daniel could not hear every word, but certain pieces reached him. "We find him," Victor said. "He knows something he should not know. He kept it hidden for years." Daniel frowned. What did Victor think he knew? The past had been complicated, but Daniel had never taken anything with him except memories. Victor continued speaking, pacing across the floor. "He slipped away once," Victor said, "but this time he will not. I want him brought here alive." Daniel felt a cold wave move through him. Victor was not just looking for him. He was hunting him. And he was certain Daniel held something valuable. Daniel stepped back carefully. He needed to leave before someone noticed him. But as he turned, the old floor groaned under his shoe. The sound echoed through the hallway like a crack of thunder inside the warehouse. Voices stopped. Daniel moved quickly down the hall, back toward the rear door. He reached the stairs just as the door behind him burst open. One of the men shouted and heavy footsteps followed. Daniel ran down the metal stairs and landed on the ground below. He sprinted toward a line of old storage units behind the warehouse. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by footsteps chasing after him. He ducked behind a row of barrels and listened. The footsteps split into two directions. They were searching, moving fast. Daniel crouched lower, planning his next move. If he kept running blindly, they would catch him. If he stayed too long, they would corner him. He needed something unexpected, something they would not predict. He grabbed a small rock and tossed it across the lot. It hit a metal pipe and made a loud clang. The footsteps rushed toward the sound. Daniel used their distraction to move silently to the back fence. It was old and weak in certain places. He pushed one of the loose panels and slipped through to the other side. He kept moving until the building was far behind him. Only then did he stop under a flickering streetlight, hands trembling from the rush of adrenaline. He took a deep breath. His double life had survived for decades, but now everything was breaking apart. He walked for several minutes before reaching his car. He unlocked it and sat inside without turning on the engine. He stared straight ahead, trying to process everything. Victor was alive. Victor thought Daniel had something he needed, and Victor was willing to chase him to the ends of the city to get it. Daniel closed his eyes. He had chosen a quiet life after the organization fell apart. He had chosen peace. But now the past demanded answers. When he finally drove home, the street was dark and still. He parked the car and scanned the area before walking to his door. Everything seemed normal, but normal no longer meant safe. He stepped inside and locked the door behind him. He sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the wooden box he had left open earlier. Inside it were pieces of his old life tools, files, and the black notebook. He opened the notebook and flipped through the pages until he reached Victor's name again. He touched the small mark next to it. Back then, the mark had meant danger. Still meant the same thing. Daniel closed the book. He realized something important. Victor believed Daniel had information from their final mission, but Daniel did not. At least, not consciously. All he had were fragmented memories of a mission that ended in chaos. Something had gone wrong. Something had been hidden. Something Victor clearly wanted back. Daniel leaned forward, covering his face with his hands. He did not want to be part of this anymore. He did not want to run, or hide, or fight. But if he did nothing, Victor would come to Willow Lane, and Daniel could not allow innocent people to be caught in the crossfire of his old life. He stood slowly and walked to the window. The neighborhood was quiet. Lights were off. Curtains were drawn. Everyone was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger moving closer. Daniel made his decision. He packed a small backpack with supplies he might need: water, a flashlight, a map, and the black notebook. He took a final look around his house, knowing he might not return for a long time. This place had given him peace for years, but now peace required sacrifice. He turned off the lights and stepped outside into the cool night air. He walked down the street with a steady pace. He was not running. He was reclaiming the skills he had buried years ago. He reached the corner where the streetlight buzzed softly overhead. He looked once more at Willow Lane. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. Daniel knew that stopping Victor meant facing his past fully. It meant uncovering the truth behind their final mission. And it meant confronting a man who had waited decades to settle old scores. But he was no longer afraid. A double life had shaped him. One life had taught him patience. The other had taught him survival. Now he would need both as he walked toward the edge of the city. Daniel felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose. His two lives were no longer separate. They had merged into one, and he was ready for whatever waited in the shadows ahead. For decades, Daniel Carter had hidden from the past. Now he would face it, and he would end this chase once and for all. Daniel Carter spent decades building a quiet life, hoping the world would forget who he once was. But secrets never disappear, they wait. And now, the shadows of his past are moving closer than ever. As Daniel steps into the night, leaving behind everything he knows, one truth becomes clear. This is only the beginning. The hunter is becoming the hunted, and the man who lived two lives must now face the one he tried to escape. If you want to see what happens next, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More stories like this are waiting, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. For watching more amazing videos like this, subscribe our channel Crime Loom.